Hello, thank you for tuning in to ESCAR Sport and Peace Media Center. I'm your host, Solmaz Abu Ali, and today we're featuring Dr. Dean Ravizza. Dr. Ravizza is an associate professor and physical education program director in the Department of Health and Sports Sciences and senior research practitioner in the Bosserman Center for Conflict Resolution at Salisbury University. Dr. Ravizza has served as the principal investigator of a long-term research project that's based in northern Uganda and that focuses on the role of sport in the reintegration and social inclusion of children and youth who have formerly been associated with armed groups. He has collaborated with various entities on similar projects. These entities include Unicef and UNHCR. He's also been featured by several media outlets such as NPR, CNN International, and the Haifa International's World Arc magazine. So Dr. Dean Ravizza, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So we'll start off with asking you, how did you get involved in sports? Just from a personal aspect, what attracted you to sports? Was it a particular sport?
I think I took pretty much the traditional route of many individuals when participating in sport. When in the U.S., participating along the same lines as many others in youth leagues and at schools. Participated in soccer and basketball mostly, and taking that traditional route on through college and participation as well. When living abroad, sport is a very uniting factor for individuals, and it's often a way in for individuals socially. So was able to, again, be able to participate in sport along that lines as well.
Was there any particular sport that you were drawn to?
I think interesting enough, and I'm going to share this with you. We talk sometimes about the ideas of diversity and sometimes even racism in sport and things. But when we lived in East Africa, in Tanzania, I chose to play football, or what we call soccer here in the U.S.
Yes.
Well, like many other countries, football was for the blacks. And the whites played rugby and cricket and other sports as well. And I loved football. It drew me to it. I liked, just the whole physical activity aspect of it. I liked the game. I enjoyed the game very much. But with it came some, social difficulties as well.
Sure.
And individuals, sometimes you felt almost marginalized at times with that. And I've never really forgotten that. And I think that is always one aspect of what drives me and what I do today.
Good. So that's a great lead-in into what I was wondering about next is what led you to dedicating yourself to the profession of sport and peace, or sport for development. It sounds like this might have sparked that interest. It seems like it left an impact on you. And so could you speak a little bit about your progression into this field, whether academia or practice?
Sure. Actually, it's both.
Yeah.
And what led me into it was a large-scale incident where we tried to put this into practice. I lived in Tanzania for many years and had the ability to go back there to be able to return there for some work right after I graduated from George Mason University.
Woohoo!
Yes, go Patriots. And I was back there working on education projects in Tanzania. And all of a sudden, of course, in 1994, we all knew that the Rwanda genocide was going on. And it was very difficult within the region because a lot of information wasn't filtering through. And we used to play badmintons on Monday evenings in this hall. And one of the individuals who played with us was a country director for Unicef at the time. And I remember, we were discussing about this, this emergency that was emerging from the West. And of course, many of us were asking, well, what can we do to assist with this? There was really a fog over it. Many, even over here in the U.S. or in other developed countries, so to speak, they didn't really know what was going on. The information wasn't filtering, let alone to the neighbors. So I still remember the director saying, well, Dean, sometimes when you want to volunteer or do things, you want to do what you do best. Well, as a recent college graduate, I think what I did best at the time was probably sleeping and eating. but there was always sport. And so we had gathered up sport equipment. There was some other individuals as well that wanted to assist. We headed up with Unicef team as well, and we had a proposal set in place, and that we wanted to create some type of sporting activities and stuff for the children and youth that were coming across the borders as immediate refugees. And so we went, and just the enormity of it was just something that cemented in my mind. The individuals that were coming in droves. And well, what we did was we actually found areas within these refugee camps for children to be able to participate into the sport. But what we also found out of this was that there's many individuals, not just the children and youth, that wanted to participate also, and not just in the actual playing of the sport, but also in the management of the sport aspect as well. And I'd like to think that at times, some of us, that it really was a springboard into this whole idea of child-friendly spaces, these common spaces for individuals that are safe to be able to come within these type of situations, to be able to not just participate in sport, but also maybe alongside other as part of holistic programming, if you will, maybe some emergency education, the ability to address some maybe critical health needs at the time could be done in this central area, and sport could certainly be part of it. Did it work? We think for what it was at that time, we thought it had maybe some type of impact there. Do we have empirical evidence to prove that? Absolutely not. We didn't have a background for this at the time, and there really wasn't any template, so to speak, or any precedent to really go off of in this case.
At the time, it was a way you wanted to help.
Exactly, and it really was a springboard into my current work, I think.
Okay, can you speak a little bit about some of your maybe publications, some of the research you've done? I know you've done a lot of work in northern Uganda, and I'm sure that at the time you did that, you were at a different stage of your life, and so it was maybe a little bit more than just wanting to help.
Exactly.
Right? You had more system behind it. I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. That's exactly it. I think that there was more of a developed focus at that time.
Yeah.
There was certainly more precedent to go off of as well. I had just completed my doctorate at Virginia Tech and spent a postdoc year back in Uganda. It was a partnership with, at the time, was when they issued, the United Nations issued their proclamation of 2005 as the year of sport and physical education for all children. So with that came really the floodgates open for the opportunity to utilize sport for development and peace building and social inclusion, or addressing socially marginalized groups as well. That paradigm, if you will. So
right place, right time.
So absolutely. So I worked with Unicef in their partner programs at the time, and I was doing some data collection as well with them. And one of the there were some large-scale NGOs that were partnering with Unicef at the time to provide programming. But I was based in the capital city in Kampala, and at the time, though, we knew that there was this conflict going on in the north, and at that time it was very public, at least within the country and within the region. The nature of it was not always really public outside again of that immediate region, but we knew that we had to do something as well, and I had pressed on with that. And I was very pleased the fact that the reaction was, okay, let's try something in the southernmost part of northern Uganda where the conflict had hit, but maybe not as seriously, and we'll try and pilot some things there. And with that came an invitation so that was with Unicef, and it partnered with one of the large NGOs to facilitate some of the programming along with some of the community-based programs that had emerged in and around the IDP, or the internally displaced person camps in that lower northern Ugandan region. But with that came an invitation to me to come to GUSCO, the Gulu Save the Children organization, which was an interim care center for formerly abducted children, and those children formerly associated with the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army at the time. And they asked me if we could somehow incorporate sport into their holistic programming to address the immediate needs of those returnees. And that was quite a challenge, because
how interesting that you had done something similar like that.
Yes.
Before.
Yes, it's almost like full circle.
Yes.
And so I was there at the center. I used to stay at the center. They introduced me there at the center, and I was very. I didn't thrust myself upon anyone there. I just really kind of stayed back and played more of an observational role at the time. Mm-hmm. And that was very critical. I think often we try to tend to lunge forward, if you will, too fast, and that can be very off-putting to individuals. And we have to think also here that the children endured, multiple layers of traumas, being associated with the Lord's Resistance Army, from as many as perpetrators of violence upon other individuals, often family members, but then also individuals who resolve their conflicts with physical violence, and often, maybe with weapons as well.
Did you feel that observational space for you gave you a different insight and made you maybe a little bit more familiar with the complexities that you would deal with if you were to be directly involved with the children outside of the observational sphere?
Absolutely. That time spent at the center, which was months, and several months at the center, and working cooperatively with them, really allowed us to see, the role of sport as an immediate response, as part of holistic programming then again, which is very important, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. But the children, they enjoyed sport. They liked it a lot. But we also have to be very careful, because, again, sport can breed conflict as much as it can help to resolve it. And
thus it's been coined as the double-edged sword, as some might say, yes.
Absolutely. So with this, this was the only time that the children really were outside of the center. We had a big playing space just at the back of the GUSCO Center, and but it adjoined one of the large secondary schools. So, the very first evening that we were engaging in some of the physical activity, often really along gender lines, girls participated in the netball, which is a traditional female sport. And boys wanted to play football. And then at times there was some opportunity for volleyball as well in a co-ed sense, which was very important for us to keep with the cultural norms as well. And a lot of the children and youth would attract a lot of children and youth from the local school when they were coming out, and I would play along. So sometimes I would think, wow, maybe they're here to see my wonderful skills. But I don't think that was really the case. I think what is he doing with these children and youth, whom all of them knew who they were, and from where they had come from. They had already had been identified as, former abductees that were at the GUSCO Center. And not so much tension, but there was one case on the very first night. A young boy from the school, secondary level student, walked through the middle of our playing area. And about midway through, I yelled to him to be very careful. And I wasn't angry at him. I just wanted him to be aware that he was in a playing space and he might get injured. And he turned to me and he said, "Mzungu," which of course is the Swahili for referring to my skin, the white man. "Why do you waste your time with these rebels?" is exactly what he said in front of everybody.
And this was a kid.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And right then and there, I was able to somewhat understand the cloud of stigma that embodied these returnees, and what they were facing out in their communities. And however, a couple weeks later, the same boy came back and asked me if he could play.
What do you attribute that to?
I attribute it to the fact that we didn't really have a reaction to him, so to speak. But and the reaction is very important, and I'll speak to that also in just a bit. And I think that he saw that really these boys and girls enjoyed playing the sport just as anyone else on the other fields or that was adjoined to this playing area was doing. That we were highly competitive yet well structured, and we enjoyed ourselves, and probably also had something to do with me being there. And sometimes that is the case, that think, okay, you know, maybe, oh, if I'm there, what's he doing for them? Can he do the same thing for me, or something along that line? You never know ulterior motives also, and I never sought to ask it. But however, I left it up to the young boys and girls. It wasn't for me to say, yes, you could play or not. It was their space, and it was up to them. And after that first incident, we had begun, I went to the social workers at the center, and one of whom was out there with us and saw this incident happen. And I asked them, can we talk about this? Can we discuss this incident? And from that came what we called under the mango tree, just our dialogue that emerged after we participated in sport. Whenever we had the sport component, we came up with these. We came up with these dialogues. One of them, for instance, was, how did that make you feel, hearing that? And there was a lot of dialogue that came about came about from the children and youth, saying that, well, you know, he doesn't know me. He could have just as easily been abducted, just like we were. We didn't ask for it, and he should get to know us before he makes these judgments. So it was very interesting to see to get their point of view of it. That's very, very important, because again, you know, it's not up for me to dictate how they feel. You know, they need to be able to express it. And so over that, I said, okay, you know, that's fine. And when that boy came back, I told the group, you know, he wants to play. You know, it's your decision. And so, and they did have, you know, and they did say, well, you know, that's fine. You know, we welcome him to play. And I think that really, that reaction is very important, and I'll speak to a second reaction later, in terms of overcoming that stigma that is often associated with being formally associated with armed groups.
You speak to something very important, I think, you speak to, there's multiple things,
yes,
but one thing that stands out in my mind is you're speaking to how sport is used. And it's important, and you spoke to the structure that was involved in the program, and you also highlighted that structure and how it was used was almost a stepping stone toward more dialogue about other important things, and tapped into the complexities of the situation. So I that was nice to hear.
Right. We really wanted to, and I think it goes back to that whole idea if you read some of the literature on creating social spaces.
Okay.
And there is some of that literature that has been brought into this idea of sport and peace building and conflict resolution, and stuff, about the idea of creating that social space. And again, I'll speak to that in just a little bit about, you know, what we're looking at in terms of the creation of what we call the peaceful environment for play.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the conclusions or some of the methodologies maybe that you've used in your research?
Oh,
or
absolutely.
Maybe some of the products?
Sure.
Yeah, conclusions/products.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, from these experiences was really the springboard into some large-scale research. I spent a period of nearly a year doing observational research in the region on the uses of sport.
Okay.
Who was participating? Who had access? In what were they participating? Why weren't individuals participating if they didn't.
Yes.
Was it their own choice, or was it something that was dictating their choice? We looked at, so we developed, after that observational period, which was very important, it allowed me to really discover what type of measures would be utilized in order to collect more data.
Excellent.
Originally, we were focusing in on just the research embodying the sport as the means for reintegration and social inclusion for those former abductees.
Okay.
Those formerly associated with the LRA.
Yes.
But it was at the urging of the local district governments, and I still remember the local district gender officer in the Kitgum district in northern Uganda who said, "Professor, you know, this is really good and we support your work very much, but all the children are war affected, so we might want to look more broadly." Whew. So even came more support. The support was certainly there, but even more
responsibility.
Exactly,
also.
Greater responsibility
Yes.
to report the, to try and report evidence towards that, obviously that statement. We chose to do some more large-scale research, large-scale survey research at the time as one of the instruments that we would utilize, and we surveyed nearly 500. Children and youth ages 12 to 22 in the Gulu and Kitgum districts in northern Uganda, both heavily war-affected districts in that region.
So how were these children selected?
We did mostly random selection. We looked
Okay.
but we looked at some important factors also. We wanted to have a gender balance, and my team, which is made up of all northern Ugandans, did an excellent job. We had 51% males, 49% females. And that's about as gender balanced as you can get. We looked for a large sample of formerly abducted within it. We had approximately 35% of our responses were associated with the LRA at one point in time, for short periods of time to periods of many years.
Okay.
We looked at whether they were in school or maybe out of school in the community. We used the schools as a starting point to collect data.
Okay.
But then also, we just didn't want, obviously, that voice to be heard. We wanted the individuals who also were not in school to be able to participate also. And the schools were absolutely wonderful in their support of not just allowing us to survey children and youth within their school, but also helping us locate children in the immediate community who were not going to school to be able to survey also.
And the children, it was participation was voluntary?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And individuals say, well, what would they get out of it? And one of the things that we had settled upon, and when I say we, some other research going on at the time as well, and we had thought that it would be best to, for completion of the survey, that they could have, dare I say, a small gift was what, obviously, the term that was used, but it wasn't, it's just something, a participatory gesture, I guess you could say. And we had for those that were in school, they received a small set of pencils, eraser, notebook, and a small kit. All of about exactly. Nice. But for those outside of school, they would look at that and say, what would I want that for? Yeah. So we made sure that we had a separate gesture also for them, and that included a small package of salt, some matchboxes, and there was a few other things in there. I don't recall right off the top of my head what was in there. And that way then they were for participating in the survey as a small gesture for doing so. We were able to go, like I said, and collect nearly 500 clean surveys. And then from that we decided to do a 10% panel of follow-up also, to be able to do some more in-depth interviews. And
what kind of questions were asked at the interviews?
Sure. We did some more probing questions in terms of looking at some key aspects of the survey. We looked at whether or not sport could help. We looked at it in several different aspects. We looked at the development aspect. We looked more first at participatory aspects.
Okay.
In what were they participating in? Well, it wasn't groundbreaking news that they were playing football, the soccer equivalent, and netball and volleyball, but there was also participation along the lines of athletics as well. and very, very few, if any, had participated in sport like basketball and even rugby and some other sports as well. We looked at those participatory patterns. We looked at who was participating, where, and when. We found that, of course, schools were the largest venue in which individuals were participating in sport. So we looked at it two ways. This is a great way to address any concerns through the schools, but then we also had the concerns that, well, a pretty significant number of individuals were participating in sport because they didn't go to school. So the whole idea is, how do you get them to school? And as the main, obviously the main aspect of that. And then they could derive the benefits of the sport through the participation within their school. We found that obviously that they lack community-based programs, which was a key finding in that sport control data, if you will.
Okay.
We looked at the development aspect, and we found that a nice little caveat. We found a very reliable subscale we called the economic development subscale, which the children and youth felt that sport could help with develop what we called some of the workplace values, and so that helped them with leadership, helped them with resolution to conflict and things like that. But however, they didn't feel that sport really could help with their employability in that aspect, that it really wasn't there for them. Well, I really can't get a job with sport. And so that was an interesting piece also that came out of that. We looked at the sport and conflict piece was very important. And from that, we derived inductively a lot of the work which we're doing now, which is a springboard into the work we're doing now. We identified 4 levels of conflict that occurred during sport, and from low-level disagreements and arguments to higher-level physicality, and even what we called the harmful level of sport, where individuals were maybe marking other individuals to do harm to them, who may have done something to them or their family outside of the sport setting. For instance, you killed my sister and brother and uncle in the village, and now you're on the opposing team, and I've noticed you, and now I'm waiting, but I'm going to do harm to you through that sport because you did harm to me already, even outside of sport. And we found that to be a very, very powerful level that was significant within the communities, but wasn't really a high rate of instances that happened. You can also have that level occur maybe off of some physicality that incurred during sport. For instance, if I tackled you really hard playing football, or I knocked you over playing netball, well, what is your response there? Sometimes the immediate response is a physical response, where I get up and push the individual or hit the individual. But also it may be a delayed response that, I'm going to wait and I'm going to do harm for you later. That's that other level of sport, that kind of that delayed response with the intention to injure or do harm to an individual. So we found these levels of conflict in sport, we call them, and then we began to inductively understand how they went about resolving the conflict within the sport, and then we were able to be able to extract culturally contextual ideas for resolution to conflict in sport that was occurring in that area, with the hope of also being able to transfer those values, those strategies, if you will, to other areas of maybe some low-intensity conflict that was occurring and was still well noted within the region. Perhaps even, there was land disputes that were going on. And we're not claiming that, we can solve all the different conflicts through these strategies.
Yes.
But there's conflict that occurs in home, school, and community, and in which the children and youth are often engaged. And maybe they could take some of these strategies and transfer them to these other low-intensity conflicts to be able to resolve them, with our hope of maybe building a bit more peaceful community with that.
How do you envision addressing, the types of conflict that you mentioned through sport? For example, this notion of revenge, almost that I'm hearing. How would one deal with that? Because this, to me, refers to the other end of the double-edged sword. And I know it's a sharp one, and I know it's a big concern, especially when the topic comes up with utilizing sport for conflict resolution.
Right. Well, we look at that exactly, that immediate resolution, the strategies for immediate resolution to conflict that was occurring, to bring about obviously some type of resolution to these conflicts that were occurring. So that way then the children and youth could go back to playing, which is what they set out to do. Sure. And enjoying and deriving the healthy benefits of participating in sport, both from a physical level but also from a social and emotional level as well.
Yes.
We look at that now. Some of the strategies we looked at though was obviously the idea of seeking outside help. We found that the role of the individual facilitating the sport, be it a community-based coach, be it a school-based sport teacher, or even an older youth that was facilitating the sport, really kind of helped shape that atmosphere, shape that environment, if you will, and be able to help address some of those conflicts. Some things are bigger than the sport, obviously. Some of these revenge tactics and things. We said that we want to do things where the child can continue to participate in the sport, but maybe they have to have some type of removal from the activity until it's addressed by either that elder, that coach, or that outside source, if you will, or maybe even another outside source within the community that would help mediate that situation, be it like a village elder or a local person. Exactly,
yes,
someone that's looked up, that's
yes.
very well trusted and very well respected within the community. Why? Because that's part of the culture.
Yes.
It's not necessarily always part of our culture. And so we have to be very careful, and that's where I want to stress that we really, the research was there to be able to help put in place these strategies because it came from the children and youth. And that is really, really an important piece, that we can't always impose these Western strategies on individuals because they don't fit. Sometimes they're round peg, square hole.
Yes.
And we have to be very careful about that.
Especially in sensitive situations.
Absolutely. And in very highly sensitive situations where there's, complex layers of trauma that are involved, levels of complexity of conflict that are bigger than all of us at times. We have to be very careful about that. So we hope that at times even so we have this idea of conflict resolution, and then that whole idea of the peace building aspect of
yes.
Establishing or even reestablishing these positive relationships within individuals within the sporting atmosphere, and hopefully transfer them to outside of that sport venue. And then the idea of, we really look at it as, the idea of conflict transformation also.
Yes.
But we look at it modestly, that contributing to the overall social and political implications of conflict. And we look at it as very modestly in that point, that maybe that we can go and somehow provide some type of resolution to some of the conflict that would occur outside of the sport, and contribute to maybe the overall building of what we call the inclusive communities.
A stepping stone.
Exactly.
Yes.
But in no way do we look at saying that sport is going to transform the area. And
yes.
So from post-conflict to, all of a sudden this is some type of panacea that's going to be utilized to all of a sudden rid the area of any type of conflict, because that's just that's not the scope of what we do,
no.
Nor is it within the scope of sport, really.
Yes, no, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I have heard arguments about how is sport going to solve the conflict, and
exactly.
And my thought is always, well, it's that's not really, like you said, it's not really in the scope.
Exactly.
I mean, it's how you structure it, how
right.
how it's very important things you mentioned include culture in the program, and then have that be a piece of the resolution,
right?
Rather than be.
Right. We really wanted it to be their program. It's not my
Yes.
program, and so it's their program, and it's their strategies, and that's why I tell people, this is what you told me. I just put it into print, and so in a logical order, so that way then we can share it together. And that's what's really, really important to me, is that it's a we. And people always ask me, you always speak of this we. Who's the we? And I said, myself and my Northern Uganda team of research assistants. And
just a quick clarification, sorry to
Sure.
jump into that, but your team also, which was locals,
Yes,
they were the
absolutely.
ones who were also administering interviews and engaging with the children.
Absolutely. They
Okay.
completed every single one of the surveys out in the field. I've never done a survey, and it's not from a lack of obviously hard work. It's the fact
Sure.
that they're going out. The respondents are going to be more open
Of
to
course.
individuals within their own culture. At times they're going to tell me what it is that they think that I want to hear. One little piece you mentioned about methodologies, and I share some of these very interesting. Number one, multiple methodologies in order to triangulate data is extremely important. But you come up against also individuals when working in this field, sometimes individuals who are illiterate, especially some of the children and youth who were in their formative years, were abducted for many years and came back and obviously had very low levels of education and often couldn't read or complete a survey and things. So we came up with some strategies. We came up with a picture strategy of being able to put pictures down and to put stones, a number of stones on the picture that's the most important to you. We came up with utilized stones and sticks and things like that. It had to be very, very creative in terms of, and that again was in collaboration with my team. We thought, okay, they're having trouble understanding. Okay, well, let's go back and let's figure out ways in which we can articulate what it is we want them to answer, but do so in a way in which would be very meaningful and also really increase that reliability, I think, of the data and stuff in which we collect. That it's on their level and they're speaking to their level at which they can, and still making a strong contribution to the research. So that was really important to us. So you do have to come up with creative methods in order to collect your data at time according to obviously the individuals with whom you're interacting.
And you mentioned a keyword, reliable, and that's important for having work like this.
Yes.
Initiate further research
Absolutely.
Along these lines, so that we can really, I know this field is really just booming, and it's important that we have strong, solid methodologies and experiments happening.
That's one of the things in which we really need to consider. It's both a weakness and a way forward. I call it telling the story empirically.
Okay.
And we need to tell our stories empirically.
Yeah.
Not just researchers who are going out there, but also those implementing programs. And I think that we can and should look at our strengths collectively and to see how can we join together more to be able to tell that story. There's some wonderful programs that are out there, but maybe lack the ability at times to be able to tell their story empirically, as I say, to collect that data with very rigorous methodologies, and to be able to go and then obviously analyze and then share those particular findings. We shouldn't be afraid of what we're going to find. And I think sometimes that's who we are. I'm the first one to say that, hey, I will stand up and tell you that sport right now was showing that, through our data, showing modest ways in which children and youth formerly associated with armed groups can be included back into their communities. We have empirical data that says that former abductees stated that through sport, they felt that they were more accepted by their peers and community members. We have that. We have empirical data. But what we don't have is to say, can we say that long term? That it really, what is the factors of sport, if you will, that help determine long-term social inclusion? We have to go back into the whole idea of what is long-term social inclusion. It's not for me to dictate what that is for former abductees, because to tell them what it is, because it's very personal. It's very contextual, if you will. It's up for them to tell us that, and that comes through again through the research.
Through more and more
And
research.
it's very important to have focus group discussions, one-on-one discussions with individuals. Can you do some type of qualitative methodologies that would be there within your focus groups to be able to categorize what is important to them in terms of, that is also culturally contextual in terms of them living out their lives within their communities in the way in which they feel is necessary to be part of their communities. It's not for me to tell them that. And so that's very important for them to tell us that. And then we can look to see what role does sport play in that, if it does play a role. And I'll be the first one to say, you know what, we don't have data to present to state that. It does assist with the long-term social inclusion, but we're working on it. And hopefully we'll get there, and we'll be able to see what factors maybe do apply in that situation.
And so really your vision forward is potentially obviously more research,
Yes.
But really a mix of qualitative and quantitative
Sure.
measures going forward, multiple methods.
Multiple methods research and stuff, mixed methodologies that would be able to, again, really tell the story well.
The bigger picture of the story.
Exactly. We felt that the original research that we had really was, there's no absolutes in it. We can't say that for sure, but we do feel that we did large enough research that it represents the voices of the children and youth within those age groups very well. And we were able to springboard this now into what we call the peaceful play strategies for resolution to conflict in sport.
Yes.
And
good.
where we derive those through the inductive analysis, those levels of sport in the culturally contextual strategies for resolution. We looked at the idea of developing ways in which you can transfer. And a lot of these resolutions were there because they were telling us this. We wanted to kind of package it, if you will, to raise the awareness towards it even more and how to utilize this. So we had a pilot group of community-based coaches and sport teachers from in the regions in northern Uganda, the conflict-affected areas in those districts. And we're very happy with some of the outcomes again, and you better believe there's data collection, multiple methods. We did surveys, again, pre and post surveys, while they were in this pilot, during the time of the pilot. So that way then the coaches and sport teachers could tell us what was working, what wasn't working. Do you feel these strategies had an influence on your program? And we were very pleased with some of the changes, if you will, in the attitudes that were there previously. For instance, many of the coaches didn't feel that children and youth were capable of resolving their own conflict. But towards the end, at the end of the post-survey, that had shifted to a more positive
Interesting.
A more positive outlook on that. So we said, so from that, what do you gauge? Let's get children and youth involved in it even more. So we look at data-driven responses, obviously, to that. And so we want to then be able to expand more with more coaches and sport teachers at the request, obviously, of the districts in northern Uganda, but we also want to involve some of the youth. And we felt that was very important because it's often, as we know, it's often many of the adults that are creating the conflict, and sometimes it's the youth that need to resolve it or will be there to resolve it. So why not? So so we're targeting at the schools. They have what we call sport prefects, which are kind of the leadership roles of male and female take on in terms of assisting the sport teachers with the organization implementation of the sport at the schools. So we figured there's two individuals right there that could be very worthy in terms of being able to resolve the conflict in sport because they're very visible within the sport. We looked also at one of the things we're very excited about. I get excited about everything, but I'm very excited about is that we also had a coach's log where the coaches were able to self-report incidents of conflict and the strategies that they utilize. Well, off that we can also take, from that we can also take control data. And that will allow us to show where conflicts were occurring, what type of conflict, and what strategies were utilized to resolve it. So then we could do a type of conflict mapping, as we called it, and we looked at being able to have maps of the district and pinpoint where these conflicts were occurring. But then can we look over a period of time to see whether or not those conflicts were subsiding just a bit? And not only in sport, but then can we look outside of sport as well? And maybe seeing whether or not this type of program has any type of impact on, again, the resolution to conflict, even outside of the sport, to build, as we said, more inclusive communities.
Yes.
It's ambitious, but it's very well possible. So we're really working hard to structure methodologies around being able to support that.
Good. It is exciting to me. It does. So what would you like to speak about? Maybe some of upcoming publications, upcoming research that we should look out for, or possibly, point us toward where we can find some of your past research, particularly the ones on northern Uganda.
Oh, sure. Actually, I'm working very hard to create just a small website, so that way then I can put all of the work that's up there. Of course, one of the links will be the outstanding efforts you put into the Sport and Peace Building Symposium at U.S. Institute for Peace back a couple of years ago, and they do have the video of the proceedings there, the proceedings up on the website, which we can link to, and I think it's very important. I send students there sometimes to take a look and say, hey, see, Dr. R's got it going on sometimes. he's there. And
Dr. Raz,
Dr. R.
Oh, Dr. R.
Dr. R. Ravizza,
okay.
Yeah.
So I need to start calling you Dr. Raz then?
No, that's
Dr.
okay.
R.
Dr. R. But things like that are very important to see that individuals are doing work. So it's not just me, but also who else is doing some of this work, to be able to get a holistic view of the work. Coming out soon is the book called Sport, Peace, and Development, edited by Keith Gilbert.
Okay.
From the professor of sports sociology at University of East London, longtime professor. And he has edited this book, and I've contributed at his request to the book, and it will give a good overview on sport and the uses of sport for the reintegration and social inclusion of the former Bhaktis in northern Uganda.
Excellent.
So the website, though, I'll PDF several different versions of the research and things and put it up there. And also, as I've stated before about the Peaceful Play program, we had also produced the manual as with support from the Bosman Center for Conflict Resolution at Salisbury University. And
if you can supply me with
absolutely
that information, I can distribute.
Absolutely.
Have it made available.
Absolutely, it'll be made available, and individuals can see kind of the framework in which we utilize.
Yes.
And for this program, we have in there also the idea of the transfer, and from the sport to the homeschooling community outside of sport situations, because it's very important. We don't want to compartmentalize everything just within sport, because they're only there for a short time. Let's capitalize on what we can do with sport and through sport into other areas as well. And then, and we have in there also, one of the last things that I'll comment on is we talked about the social spaces.
Yes. And
I really take it to heart, and what we looked at was what we call creating the peaceful environment for play, this idea of conflict sensitivity. And not just of those implementing the sport, but of some of the participants as well. We look at the conflict sensitivity. It's kind of packaged along with that, trauma sensitivity, and also the aspects of child protection, which are very important in these situations. So we look at, for instance, coaches and sport teachers having an idea of some of the levels of trauma that were obviously incurred as a result of the conflict, and being sensitive towards it. Certain language that can be utilized. Often we say, okay, boys and girls, let's go out and kill them. And obviously, that's not in the context in which we want to be able to utilize. We have to be very careful about that.
Yes.
But conversely, the participants also, those that were obviously active participants or perpetrators within the conflict, have that stigma I talked about around them, and they may be looked at as overly aggressive or a threat to the peace within the play, if you will. And so it's very important for them to be able to express themselves also, but to do so on how they really feel, using their words wisely, if you will. And for instance, a young boy or girl may be very frustrated, but if they come up and say, "I'm angry," well, then there's that stigma again, and they may be turned off. They say, "Oh, well, you're just an angry, upset form abductee, and you're very violent and very aggressive." But if they came up and say, "I'm frustrated," that can spur on conversation,
yes,
which can help, obviously, reduce those frustrations. And if that frustration is within the play, then it can help, obviously, with that intergroup cohesion, if you will, and stuff as well. So those are some things that we're focusing on also now, which I think is very, very important.
Yes.
Because we often look at the content of what we're doing, and we don't look at the structure, the environment, and that's what we want to highlight next.
That sounds like a good way forward.
Absolutely, that's the way forward.
And I look forward to learning more about your research, and hopefully we can work together in the near future.
Absolutely, I'm around.
That's good. You know where to find me, George
You
Mason?
asked me about a funny anecdote, and,
yes.
and I'm going to tell you one thing, and it's funny in terms of really imagining it happening, and always the conflict is very serious and not a joking matter, but you can find light in some things, and I found very light in this because it was a critical juncture in terms of the light bulb going on for me.
Okay.
We were playing the football, the soccer out back. When I say we, those formerly associated with the LRA at the Interim Care Center, and one boy was tackled very hard, and the one boy who did the tackle got up to help him, and I thought, oh, that's great. And the other boy who was tackled pushed him down immediately. And one of the social workers was there and walked over and said, this is not appropriate behavior, and need to apologize. And the boy resisted at first and everything, but then he did, and they resumed play, which, okay, that's fine, resolution to conflict. Did we really resolve it at that point? We're not too sure. But so we said that's why we had the dialogue pieces at the end. And because off of that would some of that harmful level come about, that revenge, if you will, the revenge tactics and stuff. But it didn't happen, which was fine. So it stayed at that level, that physical level of conflict. Later during the dialogue, the young boy, obviously voices frustrations, but he said, "Professor, I didn't push him down because I was a rebel. I pushed him down because it hurt."
Oh, jeez.
And I thought that was very interesting for him to, and I did kind of laugh. I said, oh, okay. And I thought that was very astute of him to be able to kind of separate himself, his current self, from that of the former rebel. But
and he communicated that.
Exactly, and he communicated that, and that was very important. He used his words, and so that allowed us to dialogue, though, and about it as a group. But what we have to realize is that the cloud of stigma, again, that is around them, they're overly aggressive. They're a physical threat to the well-being of the community. All of that stigma that surrounds them. Well, and often they're provoked. They're provoked by community members, maybe, and stuff, to see their response.
Or by those stereotypes.
Or exactly. So when they do encounter such situations, their response to those situations is critical for their well-being, for their future well-being within those communities, or that long-term social inclusion. So we discuss that a lot, and look what comes out of just sometimes these situations and stuff. But I always thought it was, I make light of it also.
It's a telling story, yeah.
And that was very important, because that's when a light bulb went off and said, we need to study this deeper. And so here I sit. So that's great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to actually leave the floor for you if there's anything you'd like to further comment on.
I think one last piece that
Sure.
that is really important is, and I think that I've highlighted a bit, but just really needs to be hammered home, if you will.
Sure.
That idea of the partnerships, and when working with that global south, if you will, or the partnerships, that the individuals have a lot to contribute, and we want to work in partnership or in tandem with them. If we seek to go into other communities, especially in post-conflict or in disaster situations, or be it natural or human-made or whatever type of situations, that these individuals have a lot to contribute, and that's why I always say we. That this is their program. This is they told us this story, if you will, and this is how we reacted to it. It's very important. We've negotiated to negotiate with individuals. If you're working with partners at other universities or within the community, to negotiate with them, maybe to for them to be part of publications and presentations, and we're going to be doing some presentations within the districts and down in the capital in Kampala coming up in March, back over in Uganda, and each one of my research assistants are going to play an integral role in that, in terms of talking about maybe data collection methodologies and things, but also some of the coaches from the pilot program are very important to us, because they're going to be able to speak to the program and the changes that evolved also. So it's really important for individuals, especially from the global north, if you will, that are partnering with that seek to do work in the global south, to be able to form that strong partnership with them, and that it's a we, not an I, or it's not just for the benefit of the individual going in there, but it's for really keeping an eye on the benefit of all those involved. And so that's one of the things I think that we have to look at moving forward in this field very much, is that. And of course, like I said, telling our story empirically is very important.
Yes.
And sharing methodologies. I'm always open to sharing methodologies and stuff which we utilize, and maybe they can transfer within other cultural contexts as well, or can be modified within that context. So that's important, so that we come up with some common methodologies that produce reliable, valid data in which we can continue to build the foundation for this field.
Well, I like that, and I'm definitely going to take note of your emphases, and and again, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. We'll be in touch. Please send me information that you have so I can make it available.
Absolutely.
And we will take it from there. And I look forward to maybe a future podcast together. Maybe once you have some of these stuff that you talked about. Maybe once we get a little bit more progress on them. Like your meeting in March.
Absolutely.
We can get an update on that.
Any more data that comes out of it, and be happy to share.
Excellent.
And it's always a pleasure to be back with George Mason University.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in today. We've spoken with Dr. Dean Ravizza from Salisbury University, and we've learned a little bit about his research on the reintegration and social inclusion of children and youth from formerly associated with armed groups. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time.